Picture this: the world is not a metaphor. It is the weight of dry, unforgiving earth pressing down on the rough-hewn planks just inches from your face. It is the suffocating darkness, so absolute it feels like a physical substance filling your lungs instead of air. You try to scream, but the sound is swallowed by the silence and the soil. Your fingers, already raw, scrape against the splintered wood of the cheap coffin, a prison built by the man who promised to cherish you. This is not a nightmare you can wake from. This is the grave your husband, Mayor Alastair Thorne, has put you in. Your crime: barrenness. A failure to produce an heir for his dynasty of dust and deceit. His public eulogy had been a masterpiece of feigned sorrow, speaking of a sudden fever that stole his beloved Alara away. But you are not gone. You are here, in the cold, silent earth, with the last of your oxygen burning like a final, desperate prayer in your chest. Miles away, under the same merciless sun, a man named Silas carved a lonely existence out of the cracked plains. He was a man made of the same hard materials as the land he worked, all sharp angles, sun-beaten skin, and a silence born of profound loss. A jagged scar, a pale lightning strike running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, served as a permanent reminder of a life that had demanded more from him than it gave. His wife, Mary, was gone, taken by the very act that was meant to bring life, leaving him with 4 children who were now the entire map of his world. Caleb, at 12, had his father's stoicism but his mother's watchful eyes. 10-year-old Leah was a ghost of her mother, gentle and kind. 7-year-old Jonah was a whirlwind of questions and scraped knees. And then there was Rose, the infant whose first cry had been answered by her mother's last breath. Silas's heart was a locked room, the key buried with Mary. That afternoon, a freak dust storm, a biblical tempest of ochre and fury, tore across the prairie. It was a monster of wind and grit, powerful enough to reshape the very land itself. Silas, securing his small, sturdy cabin against the onslaught, felt the old ache of grief rise with the wind. The world outside howled, a reflection of the permanent storm inside him. When the fury finally passed, leaving the sky a bruised, hazy shade of copper, Silas went to check on his livestock. It was then, near the forgotten edge of his property that bordered the town's desolate burial ground, that he saw it. The storm had acted like a giant, scouring hand, peeling back a layer of earth and revealing the corner of a crude wooden box. He would have mistaken it for old debris, if not for the sound. A faint, rhythmic scratching. Tap. Tap. Scrape. He froze, his blood turning to ice. It was a sound that did not belong here, a sound of impossible life. He grabbed the shovel from his wagon, his powerful arms driven by a primal instinct he didn't understand. The soil was loose, freshly disturbed. He worked with a desperate intensity, his breath tearing from his lungs. The sound grew louder, more frantic. It was the sound of a trapped animal. He pried the lid with the edge of his shovel. It splintered, groaned, and finally gave way. And there, inside, lay a woman. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face chalky with dust and dwindling life, her lips cracked and bloodless. She gasped, a ragged, raw intake of air that was more a death rattle than a breath. Her eyes, the color of a twilight sky, stared sightless at the burning world she had been returned to. Silas, a man who thought he had no more room for shock or sorrow, simply stared. He had not been digging a grave, he had been unearthing a miracle. He reached down, his calloused hand surprisingly gentle, and lifted her from the suffocating darkness. She was as light as a bundle of dried corn husks, and as he carried her away from the open wound in the earth, he didn't know that he was carrying the woman who would either save his family or destroy what little was left of it. In the dim, quiet light of Silas's cabin, Alara drifted between a world of suffocating darkness and the waking nightmare of her survival. For days, she was a specter, haunted by the memory of soil filling her mouth. She flinched from shadows, her hands reflexively checking for walls closing in. The cabin itself was a sanctuary of wood smoke and whispered life. It was small, built with sweat and necessity, but it was a fortress of humble warmth. Silas moved around her with a heavy, deliberate grace, a silent sentinel. He never pressed her for answers, never asked how a living woman came to be in a coffin. He simply placed a bowl of thin broth by her bedside, changed the damp cloths on her fevered brow, and sat watch in the evenings, the firelight carving deep valleys into his stoic face. His presence was a silent promise, "You are safe here." The true healers, however, were the children. At first, they were wary of the strange, silent woman who slept in their mother's bed. They watched her from doorways, their faces a mixture of fear and profound curiosity. It was Leah, with her mother's tender heart, who broke the silence. She approached the bed one afternoon, clutching a small, clumsily stitched doll. Without a word, she placed it in Ilara's limp hand. It was a simple gesture, but for Ilara, it was an anchor. It was the first touch that didn't feel like a threat, the first offering that wasn't laced with expectation. She curled her fingers around the doll, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Slowly, life began to seep back into her. She started to sit up, her voice a fragile whisper. She learned their names. Caleb, the solemn guardian of his siblings, who looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and a desperate longing for a mother's care. Leah, the gentle soul who would bring her wildflowers. Jonah, the irrepressible spark, who would ask 1,000 questions about the world beyond their small homestead. And baby Rose, whose gurgles and cries were a constant, painful reminder of the child Ilara could never have, yet whose innocence began to mend the deepest cracks in her spirit. One day, Silas found her humming a lullaby to the infant, a tune she hadn't realized she remembered. He stood in the doorway, unseen, and felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so foreign he almost mistook it for pain. Ilara found her purpose not in grand gestures, but in the small, daily rhythms of family. She taught Caleb how to read from an old, tattered Bible, his brow furrowed in concentration as she patiently guided him through the Psalms. She showed Leah how to mend a tear in Jonah's shirt with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She learned the weight of Rose in her arms, the specific pitch of her cry when she was hungry versus when she was tired. She was not a replacement for their mother, she was something new, a missing piece they hadn't known their family puzzle needed. Her hands, once soft and manicured for a mayor's wife, grew calloused from kneading dough and scrubbing clothes. The ghost of Alistair's cruelty began to fade, replaced by the immediate, tangible needs of these 4 small lives. Her conversations with Silas were sparse, but held the weight of entire volumes. One evening, as they sat by the fire while the children slept, she finally spoke of the grave. "He told everyone I had the fever," she said, her voice hollow, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Because I could not give him a son. He said I was a curse on his name." Silas didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply nodded, his gaze steady and unwavering. He reached over and gently touched the back of her hand with his rough fingers. "A man who mistakes a woman for a plot of land to be sown isn't a man at all," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He's just a thief." In that moment, Ilara understood the depth of his character. He was a man who knew the difference between ownership and devotion, between power and strength. The scar on his face no longer looked fearsome, it looked like a testament to survival, just like the faint lines of terror that still framed her own eyes. In the quiet solitude of the prairie, surrounded by a grieving man and his motherless children, the woman who had been buried for being barren was slowly, painstakingly, becoming a mother. A fragile hope began to grow in the barren soil of her heart. The fragile piece of their found family was destined to be shattered. News, like tumbleweeds, travels on the wind in the vast emptiness of the plains. A passing trapper, stopping in the town of Prosperity for supplies, spoke of the widower Silas and the mysterious woman who now lived with him and his children, a woman of quiet grace who bore a startling resemblance to the mayor's late, lamented wife. The rumor slithered through the dusty streets until it reached the ears of Mayor Alistair Thorne himself. Alistair, a man whose ambition was matched only by his vanity, felt a cold fury settle in his gut. It was not love or loss that drove him, it was the chilling indignation of being defied. Ilara was his failure, a secret he had buried 6 feet deep. For her to be alive was an intolerable loose end, a living testament to his monstrous lie. She was not a person to him, she was a possession that had inexplicably escaped its tomb. He would reclaim his property and bury his secret once and for all. One brittle autumn afternoon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. It was not a storm this time, but something far more menacing. Silas, mending a fence post, saw it first. His body went rigid. He knew the look of riders with a purpose. He strode back to the cabin, his face a mask of grim determination. "Ilara, take the children to the root cellar. Bar the door from the inside and do not open it until I tell you to." No matter what you hear, Ilara's blood ran cold. She saw the truth in his eyes. Alistair had found her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her, but then she looked at the faces of the children. Caleb stood tall, his small fists clenched. Leah's eyes were wide with fear. She scooped up Rose, took Jonah's hand, and her panic hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. She would not be a victim again. "Be safe, Silas," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. He only nodded, his hand resting for a moment on the axe handle leaning against the doorframe. Alistair Thorne and his 2 thuggish deputies reined in their horses, trampling Leah's small wildflower garden. Alistair dismounted, his expensive coat a stark, black stain against the rustic landscape. His face was a sneer of smug authority. "Silas," he began, his voice oozing a false congeniality. "I've come for my wife." The poor woman, in her grief-stricken delusion, faked her own death and ran away. "I'm here to bring her home." Silas stood before the cabin door, a mountain of a man, his feet planted in the earth. He refused to yield. "There's no one here by that name," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. "The only woman here is under my protection." Alistair's facade crumbled. "That woman is my property. You are harboring a fugitive and interfering with the law. Step aside, or my men will remove you." Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open. Ilara stood there, her face pale but her spine forged of steel. The children were huddled behind her. She would not hide in the dark again. "I am not your property, Alistair," she said, her voice clear and ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I am a woman you tried to murder." Alistair laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Delusional. Deputies, get her." As the men moved forward, Silas moved faster. He was not a brawler, but a man defending his home, and there is no force on earth more formidable. He disarmed the first deputy with a brutal efficiency, the man's wrist snapping with a sickening crack. The second lunged, but Caleb, in a flash of desperate bravery, hurled a heavy piece of firewood that caught the man in the back of the knee, sending him sprawling. Alistair, enraged, pulled a pistol from his coat. "You peasant! This is my town. She is mine." He aimed not at Silas, but at Ilara. In that heart-stopping moment, as Alistair's finger tightened on the trigger, Ilara did not flinch. She simply stared back at him, her gaze burning with all the injustice she had suffered. It was the howl of a wolf that saved her. From the side of the cabin, Silas's half-wild dog, Ghost, a creature as scarred and silent as his master, launched itself at Alistair. The pistol fired, the shot going wild and splintering the doorframe. Alistair screamed as the dog's teeth sank into his arm. He fell back, dropping the gun. Silas was on him in an instant, his hands closing around Alistair's throat, not with the intent to kill, but with the cold, absolute power of a man who had been pushed too far. "You will leave this place," Silas growled, his voice a low tremor of righteous fury. "And you will never return. You will tell everyone she is gone, or I will tell them what lies buried in the potter's field." Beaten, terrified, and exposed, Alistair Thorne scrambled to his feet, clutching his savaged arm. He gave Ilara one last look, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, before mounting his horse and fleeing into the dusk, his remaining deputy trailing behind him like a coward. The dust settled, leaving behind a profound silence broken only by the whimpering of the injured deputy and the heavy breathing of Silas. The immediate danger had passed, but the world had been irrevocably changed. Elara rushed to Silas, her hands checking him for injuries, her touch conveying a universe of fear and gratitude. He caught her hands in his grip firm and grounding. "It's over," he said, his eyes meeting hers. Behind them, the children emerged from the doorway. Caleb, his face smudged with dirt, looked at his father with an expression of pure awe. Leah was crying silently, and Jonah was clinging to Elara's leg. She knelt, pulling them into a tight embrace, burying her face in their hair. In the aftermath of the violence, under a sky streaked with the colors of a fresh bruise, they were no longer just a man, a woman, and 4 children. They were a family, forged in defiance and cemented in the shared defense of their home. The fire of the confrontation had not destroyed them, it had burned away the last vestiges of their old, broken lives. Silas looked at Elara, her arms wrapped around his children, and the lock on his heart finally, completely, gave way. She had not been brought to him by a storm of dust, but by a wind of destiny. He had pulled her from a grave, and in doing so, she had pulled him back into the world of the living. Together, they would rebuild, not just the splintered doorframe, but the very foundations of their lives, upon the unshakable ground of love and loyalty. So what defines a life? Is it the legacy we are born into, or the one we build with our own 2 hands? Is a person's worth measured by what the world says they lack, or by the love they prove they are capable of giving? Elara was cast out, buried alive for being barren, a vessel deemed empty and worthless by a man of power. Yet in the dust, she found everything. She discovered that a mother's heart is not defined by biology, but by the fierce, unwavering choice to protect, to nurture, and to love. She found a man who didn't see her as a failure, but as a survivor. And she found 4 children who didn't need her to give them life, but to give their lives meaning. They saved her from the grave, and she saved them from a life without a mother's light. How many times in our own lives do we allow ourselves to be defined by our perceived shortcomings? How often do we judge others not by the content of their character, but by a checklist of hollow expectations? The world is full of Alastair Thorns, who seek to bury anything that doesn't fit their narrow definition of success. But it is also full of people like Silas and Elara, who prove that true family isn't about bloodlines. It's about who stands with you when the dust storm comes, who fights for you when the world tries to tear you down, and who sees the miracle of your existence, even when you've forgotten it yourself. What do you think is the true measure of a family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.